Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with a discussion about Nurgle, the troubled child of Total War Warhammer 3. I mean, I think with the exception of the Demon Prince, who's really not so much of a race, but a conglomeration of races, but with that particular exception, Nurgle has really stood out as being the single worst badly designed race in the game. And while Thrones of Decay was amazing for dwarves and for the Empire, it wasn't so amazing for Nurgle. And let me explain. Creative Assembly designed Thrones of Decay on the basis of an idea that it would be workable in both Realms of Chaos and Immortal Empires. And as such, they didn't redesign the core race in such a way that it would work very well in Immortal Empires. Let's take into consideration the following aspect: climate. So Nurgle on a surface level looks really good from a climate perspective, except that they have one specific issue: mountain climate. And climate for Nurgle actually hurts them more than other races, partly because of the construction time of a lot of the core buildings that they do have. So for instance, you get hero capacity at tier 3 for 2 heroes, but the building to do so requires 5 turns to build. Add in climate penalties and things do start looking worse for them. And that is one of the core issues that does exist for Nurgle. It's that building time. It's the cycle time as well. It's the construction time for various buildings in the first place that becomes a pretty big and major issue. Because it's one thing to build a barracks and then have a cycle of 4 turns, but you take 4 turns to build it in the first place. And again, that is an issue that does exist for Nurgle, and an issue that Creative Assembly should have fixed. Because here's what ends up happening with that climate combination plus infections for buildings, which you also use for plagues. I mean, the problem is, the whole point of Nurgle is to use plagues, but if plagues are using the same resource as military construction, then you're not going to go with military construction, especially if the climate penalty kicks in. So what instead you're going to do is you're going to focus heavily on infections. I'm sure there was a genius level idea behind it. It's like, oh, if people want to focus on plagues, they can focus on plagues. But we don't gain enough infections to do both plagues and military construction. And so the plagues themselves are not good enough to justify it. I mean, there are absolutely some things over here, like for instance construction costs for old buildings, that you can get from a plague standpoint. But the actual plagues, especially when it comes to inducing a negative effect on your enemy, ends up being worthless, especially on higher difficulties. And infections plus climate equals disaster, especially when you consider that Tamurkhan himself has to deal with both Grimgor and Goldtooth. And not only is the climate in itself not conducive for Nurgle, it's also beyond the climate penalty. Like for instance, you can use a climate penalty removal mod, but even if you do use such a mod, you still have to deal with the particular problem that, well, you are dealing with factions in the mountains that have tunneling stance and you don't. And that is one of the core issues of Nurgle. It's something that hurts Kugaf, because Kugaf has to deal with Greases, and if he has to deal with Greases, guess who's going to come in from the north and whoop your ass? His name is Grimgor. He doesn't do gentle. Grimgor never does gentle. He shows up and beats the crap out of you, and at most you can appease him or get out of his way or have a far more powerful army than anything Nurgle can put together. I mean, on top of that, the limited level of recruitment means that you're heavily incentivized going down the hero path, but even that is fairly slow. Like for instance over here, it's turn 14. For some people, turn 14 that isn't that slow at all, but keep in mind the kind of pacing that Immortal Empires has. I've won campaigns in 10 turns. There's people I've won campaigns that got into a dominant position in 5 turns. And you don't even need to necessarily exploit things in order to get into that position. That is one core issue of Nurgle. Nurgle is really good if you do build up, but the game doesn't support the build up playstyle. It supports a go there, go fast, kick the shit out of everyone playstyle. That is a core design problem that the game does have, and it hurts Nurgle in one of the worst ways possible. A lot of people on the poll I did of the chaos races that need the most help did vote Tzeentch. But for all the issues that Changeling and Tzeentch have, the Changeling and Siege at least work well in the early game. They aren't a fun campaign, they're not a fun race to deal with, but at least they work well within the context of how the game is played. Whereas Nurgle, well, let's just say Nurgle does not work so well within the context of way the game is played. And that is where I think Creative Assembly needs to improve things. Now, the leaks suggest they're going to do Glotkin, which would make sense for them to do another pass in Nurgle. It would go a long way to improve the climate situation. It would go a long way to not have to deal with Grimgor. Like, think of this. Nurgle can do vassalization for diplomacy, right? That is one core aspect that Nurgle has available to it. But you can't do vassalization in the way diplomacy works without barracks. And since barracks cost infections, you can kind of see the problem. But furthermore, when you're playing a Tamurkhan campaign, you might not care about the short or long campaign victory conditions, but you're basically not going to be able to quote-unquote complete the campaign unless you're actually dealing with Grimgor and Greases. And the sad part about it, the hilarious part, is one of the best ways to actually deal with Grimgor and Greases is to vassalize Grimgor and then turn Grimgor against Greases, and he will win that. And maybe that is something that Nurgle should be able to do. Victory through vassalization, diplomatic vassalization. So these kind of campaign victories do not serve Nurgle well. And then we could talk about the actual unit roster situation. I mean, Nurgle has a good unit roster, don't get me wrong on that one, but you know, you're looking at a pure melee race where a lot of the units are demons. Nurgle does have some of the best mortal infantry in the game with Chaos Warriors of Nurgle and with Chosen Nurgle, which flat out stand the best in the fucking game, even if they lack halberdiers. But one of the things they do lack significantly is a unit that is capable of destroying walls effectively. I mean, they have some options, but again, those options just don't end up competing against others. It was nicer when we had ogres, or if Bile Trolls could have wall breaker ability. I find it ridiculous that they don't have wall breaker ability. But some ability of breaking down walls as Nurgle would be very much in order. At least one option that didn't require you to go very high end on things. Like, yes, you do have, again, you have some ways of dealing with it. Toad Dragons, if I'm not mistaken, do have that capability. But you're talking about a level of capability that is only available very high end in a campaign. Now, on top of that, and of course we do have giants, we shouldn't dismiss that, but again, just because giants have the ability of breaking down walls does not mean, or rather a regiment renowned Chaos Giant of Nurgle, just because we have that does not mean we have a solution. Which means the best Nurgle campaign in the game is actually Festus, really, genuinely so. He might not have all the heroes that Tamurkhan has. Not that those heroes end up serving Tamurkhan in the best possible way. Let me explain. The capability of those heroes is immense, but getting access to them in a meaningful way when they do matter is a pain in the neck, and then you have to level up those heroes to really use their full capability. Yes, getting a Dreadquake Mortar, getting a Gorgon, getting a War Mammoth, all those kind of fancy things is very damn useful and very powerful, so are Hell Cannons through one of the chieftains that you have. But again, leveling them up is annoying because you have to do a number of objectives. And besides Kask, who's more of a cavalry lord, and you really shouldn't be forced to go with Kask all the time. I mean, maybe you should just start with him. I mean, you do technically start with him, but then in order to get anyone else, you need to level him up, which requires you to fight a number of battles and create a number of plagues. It's annoying because you're literally creating plagues just to get access to other chieftains. And then with those other chieftains, you have to do 10 of these actions. You have to defeat Skaven, Greenskins, Dwarves, and Bal, or loot settlements in order to level up Doombolt, for instance, who's the singular best chieftain that Tamurkhan has. Eventually, you end up dominating the campaign, but by that point, you're steamrolling the campaign. And my point in this is not that there's not a cool factor in this. It is. But cool factor should be cool to use. It should not be a pain in the neck to get access to it. Some video games, what often they do is they lock all the cool shiny stuff behind barriers that make it irrelevant by the time you actually get it, because by the time you can use it, you're already in a dominant position as a player. I can think of numerous RPGs where you have that super weapon that is really fun and powerful to use, or power armor, for instance, if we think of Fallout 4, but by the time you can even use it, what are you going to use it against? Like the occasional Death Claw in Fallout 4, for instance, the occasional one. There's a couple of other enemies, of course, as well. By the time you can use power armor continuously, you kind of don't really need it, and so the cool factor loses a lot of its value. If we look at a contrast of video games that did this well from an RTS standpoint, we can think of Legacy of the Void. You have a lot of cool shit. You start with cool shit that's workable, or you start with solid unit roster, you unlock cool shit in the campaign, and then you actually have to use it to win it. Legacy of the Void especially won significant points on this level, because some of the final missions of Legacy of the Void were amazing. That is what is really lacking in Warhammer 3, and maybe something that Creative Assembly will do better going forward, especially with Lords and End Times and Warhammer 40k Total War. Or not. If I were a betting man, I would not necessarily bet in favor of Creative Assembly doing well with an endgame situation. They've tried before, and every single time that they've tried, it has not worked out. But maybe 40k Total War will be the one game, and maybe End Times will be the bridge between what we have had in the past and what we can have in the future. And maybe 40k Total War really finally fixes the endgame situation and the inverted difficulty curve we have. Because that's the core issue of Nurgle, the inverted difficulty curve. That is all I had to say. Costin signing out.